What's going on, y'all? We're gonna go ahead and do a little bit of a deep dive on this bare bones React TypeScript Express repository we have on the Covalence IO GitHub. It is going to serve as your starting off point for a lot of your projects. And just like my Readme that I rewritten late last night, I was up pretty late, as you can see. Or if you look at my commit history, it was like 1 in the morning when I was making some of these commits and pushes. But, you know, it's not the be-all, end-all of boilerplates. It's not meant to replace Create React App, Next.js, Gatsby, and things you might see online. But it is a pretty solid, again, foundation to set up to go ahead and let you focus on building your servers, learning TypeScript, learning React trickery, and combining React and interfaces from TypeScript and things like that. So it's a great place as a sandbox to learn. So, you know, to get this boilerplate up and running on your machines, you need to get this code copied to your computer. So by this point, you've probably cloned a couple projects in your life, then go ahead and, you know, maybe skip forward a few minutes to see what I'm still talking about or not. But for those of you that just want a breakdown of how it works and why, continue to watch. So to do that, we have a couple options. We can just download, well, the zip, I believe, just by going over here and asking it to download the zip file here. But we're going to do this from a command line perspective, and this assumes that you clearly have Git installed on your command line. I think this is the flag to figure out if you have it installed or not. I mean, by this point in the course, I really hope you do. However, I'd be surprised. So on this code drop down here, there is a convenient link that we can copy to our clipboard that gives us the repository, remote, the address to get this code. And if I want it copied to my computer, there's a nifty command called clone that allows us to paste our link after that command as our first argument that will simply take all of the code in that repository and copy it to our computers. Yeah. Now, if you do this, it's simply going to create a new folder called Bare Bones React TypeScript Express. But if you want to customize the name of the folder and not have to deal with weird subfolder structures and things like that, you can simply pass an additional argument on your command line here to call the project whatever you want. So we could call it the Boiler Demo or something like that. There we go. So that will actually create a folder called Boiler Demo, and that Boiler Demo folder is what it's going to copy all the code into. So we're not going to call every single clone of our code here Bare Bones React TypeScript Express. And so well, it already exists. Looks like I had planned, like I said, I did a dry run of what this series is going to go through. So it looks like I already have that. So you know what? Let's go ahead and get rid of that thing. And we're going to try that again. And I mean, it's early in the video, but people seem to like when I leave my mistakes in because I guess it humanizes me and it encourages y'all to, I always say this every time I make a mistake. Y'all know what it's about. I like leaving them in because it's real. I make the same dumb things, same dumb mistakes that everyone does, and it's not worth getting bent up out of shape over or anything like that. It's just laugh it off and move on because we all make them. Let's try that again. We're going to clone this code to our computer. This is a great thing to do if you want to copy someone's code to your machine and help them debug or add a feature, for example. So that was pretty quick. It just made a new folder. If I hit ls, we have it right here. Boiler-demo was created for me. I'm going to cd into this sucker right now. That way I'm in that command line spot right there. And all I need to do to get this thing up and running is run npm install. This will tell Node to go into the package.json and install all those lovely little dependencies to make this project work. It's going to create our node_modules folder. It's going to make sure our package-lock.json is up to date about how the whole thing is built. And it will also tell you if there are any vulnerabilities, dependencies that are missing, and things like that. As long as you don't get a massive error, you're probably fine. You might get several warnings. If you get vulnerabilities, I've had students DM me middle of the night saying, I got a vulnerability, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, it's probably not that big a deal. Not for these labs and projects unless you take this thing all the way into production and get real users and real sensitive data when they register. That's not a worry about stuff like that, but a lot of the times these vulnerabilities occur because someone found a little bug or a little file problem in one subdependency of a subdependency. And a lot of the times, because these are written by people in their spare time for free, it might take a week or two for an update to come out. And a lot of the times you can just use npm audit and npm audit fix to correct them. So no big deal. Now that we have that made to run this boilerplate. All you have to do is run npm run dev, and a couple steps are going to happen that my readme in this boilerplate will tell us. So as of right now, it's saying, hey, I can't find the server, which is what that error was just a moment ago up here. It's just saying that, hey, there is no dist server.js, which we're going to go into later, because on the first build, that's not going to exist quite yet. And there's ways you can get around that to avoid this error, but if you don't mind seeing the error appear for a second and then get ignored, all of our code will compile from TypeScript to JavaScript, and all those JavaScript files get bundled by Webpack and outputted somewhere in our folder. And when that finally happens, everything will kick on. NodeMon will start our server. Our server is coded by default to send an index HTML that includes some basic React code that simply says, hello world. I need to dark theme this right here. That's what I need to do. Cool. And that's it. We have our project up and running, and we know we are set up for success. I'm going to go ahead and probably stop this thing for now, and we're going to go ahead and open up the code editor to take a look at what's going on inside of this repository. So, looking at the README, which will kind of serve as my reference guide for all this information here. Let me actually open up the real version of it so we don't have to sit there and look at the markdown. We're going to look at the nice output here that I was up late writing. So, I kind of went over the purpose of the boilerplate. Again, it's just a learning environment. That's what it's meant for. It's meant to just get some of the low-level stuff out of your way so you don't have to mess with configuration files for hours on end, and just focus on actually building something fun and cool. Now, it's not going to have a lot of quality of life. I might actually repeat myself on that one more than once, where it's not meant to mimic Create React App and Next and things like that. We don't have automatic code splitting, automatic refreshing, none of that kind of fancy stuff that you have there. Now, that is to say that you could go into those kinds of projects, eject out of them so you can see their configuration files, like you can run npm run eject in Create React App to see how they do certain features. A very common question I get asked is, how can I have my browser auto refresh when it knows my React code has changed? For that, look into something called hot reloading, or just look up Google things on adding Webpack auto refresh and things like that for React, and you'll find some tutorials online, including maybe one of my own videos that I had made on how to add it. If you're looking for any particular feature or quality of life thing you wish you had on this project, let me know, and I'll look into how to add it myself if I don't already know, and maybe I'll consider making a video. But part of the fun of those kind of features is getting them working yourself. It's very gratifying to get it figured out, even if you feel like you're just copying and pasting configuration that you found on Stack Overflow without any idea of what it actually does, which is what I do half the time anyway. So, the next section here is about running the project, which we already kind of did. I talk, and this goes a little bit more in depth, and it's written down exactly the steps we had talked about of what git clone does, why we cd into that, which hopefully you guys and gals know why I cd'd into that folder, why we ran npm install and how it works and what it does, and then what npm run dev does. So this command here is going to be what you're going to be using to, develop the app. Surprise, surprise. It actually uses NodeMon on the server side in order to auto restart our server. Now, that part will auto restart, but the browser won't. Every time you make a change to your React code, you'll have to wait for Webpack to do its thing, and then after that's done, you'll have to then refresh the browser to reflect your client-side changes. But server-side changes do start automatically. You need to, it takes us through here. I wrote this last night, and it takes us through exactly what that npm run dev script does. Basically, what you have to worry about if you're curious about what this does is looking at npm run all. It's a module we use to run scripts in parallel that works both on Windows, Mac, and Linux without too many problems or issues. And it allows us to run these two scripts in parallel. It allows us to say, hey, Webpack, run your configuration and do what you have to do. And Webpack is what will follow a rule set to compile all of our TypeScript down to JavaScript, and then take all that JavaScript, bundle it up, and smash it into compressed files, and output them to two separate locations. And those two locations are dist server.js, which is all of our server-side code condensed down into this one file, and that's where NodeMon ends up running when it detects that file has changed. And then all of our React code gets compiled and bundled and sent to this app.js file. So this is all of your React code. And you'll notice that they're ignored in the .env file because you can, but we're not going to be pushing our production code as we're developing to GitHub, because we're going to probably build our project when it's time to deploy it anyway. Cool. So that's all it does. And that -w flag means watch. So because Webpack knows where it's watching, it says that there's any saved files here in client or here in server, then rebuild and re-output everything so we have the most up-to-date thing in our browser and our terminal that we can see for our server and our React website. And then watch server is what, well, when it detects that this server.js file has changed, whenever we change our server code and output it, it will know to restart our server for us. Good stuff. All right. So moving on down, npm run dev just runs a series of scripts to try and make sure everything is compiled, bundled, outputted, and ran so you can actually develop your app and play with it. Again, these points will go in a bit more in depth than what I'll probably do here in this video, as probably be boring talking 40 minutes for how this boilerplate works. But if you're interested, I can deep dive anything y'all want. So the server starts up on port 3000 by default. If you have any problems with that, that means you probably have something already running on that port. Just bump it up to 3001, 8080, other common development ports. Play around with it, and if you don't know why you have something on 3000, there's ways you can go and find what process is running there and kill it. Quite literally. So there is a npm run start, because I've had students ask me about this one. You probably won't be using it locally unless you're testing what I would describe as pre-deployment. Like, this start script doesn't have the automatic restarting of nodemon, and it doesn't even recompile and rebundle anything. So this start script is what you would run when you deploy this to the real world. myawesomewebsite.com, when they go to that domain, it loads in the browser, it runs the script, and that's it. There's no rebundling, recompiling. There is no restarting. It should just run and hopefully not awfully crash when it's actually out there in the real world. So this is going to be like what happens in the real world type script, but you won't be using it on your local machines all that much. Cool. Very cool. Goes down at the bottom. Of course it does. Alrighty then. So with a little basics of how that script works and how this boilerplate is pieced together, we can talk a little bit more about the server here, where everything server-side development-wise, you're going to be writing surprise in your server folder. Something I want y'all to keep in mind is that this has no opinions on how a database or file system is connected. In the TypeScript Chirper lab, you had to either just allow the chirp store errors or the chirp or strong type chirp store into a TypeScript file, and you would use that as your database, essentially. You could choose to learn MongoDB, a NoSQL database, and learn how to connect it to a Node Express project. In this course, we teach y'all how to do a SQL database, specifically using MySQL as the data driver for that. Yeah? So there's no opinion on how the database is set up. It's up to you. It simply spools up a simple Express server with a basic example of a route. And the more robust your applications get, you're probably not going to be coding everything in this one routes file. And this series is going to be meaning to show y'all a solid fundamental setup for your server-side code. All right? So it's pretty simple, pretty unopinionated. I will say that I've seen students attempt to write code in the server, import it in the client, and vice versa, and you will not be doing that. There are tricks to sometimes fudge that between server and client, but y'all aren't going to be doing that. What you write in server stays in the realm of the server, and what you write in the client stays in the realm of the client. The only way those two are going to talk together is the client's going to be making fetch requests to your server to retrieve information from it. You won't be importing and exporting code between the two. They are two entirely separate realms of existence with their own separate console logs, just to make things more complicated. You have a browser console log that will typically be logging errors in your React code, and you're going to have your terminal logs, aka where your server is running, that's going to be logging server-side errors and problems. So keep that in mind. They're separate realms of existence, and the only way they communicate are through fetch requests. All right? This starting at the bottom thing is getting a little out of hand. All right. So the important part to know is that once your server is compiled and bundled, it's outputted to dist server.js. And there you go. Client-side stuff, same rules apply. It will be compiled and bundled and outputted to public.js app.js. This one file is going to represent all of our React website code. And once again, it's its own code base with its own console log. You'll be experimenting with it in the browser only, and remember, you're only going to be making fetch requests in order to talk to the server-side part here. You're not going to be importing some code from the server. Again, there are tricks to share things, especially for TypeScript between the two, but we're not going to be doing that here, just to make sure that our fundamentals are set, and then you can learn to blur the lines a little bit down the line, rather than right now and getting people confused thinking it's always okay to do. So I don't think our course actually talks about this, so I linked the two videos that we have on Covalence. Matt Landers has a fun Let's Get Sassy video and a fun video called Overriding Bootstrap Variables, and I kind of talked about it more here as well, as some students kind of magically find it or ask me in Discord going, hey, what's the purpose of that file? I'm like, oh yeah, it's X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh cool, thanks. Well, I wanted to include a little blurb on it here because I want y'all to know and be armed with the most information possible. So SCSS, or SAS, stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets, and it's pretty much what TypeScript kind of is, kind of, not really. I think if TypeScript compiles to JS, then SAS compiles to CSS. So the point is, you get to write CSS with extra cool functions and variables and extra features that you can do that aren't available in raw CSS format, and then it compiles down to browser-safe CSS, which is why people like it so much. So I do advise you spend I think it's 40 minutes total between the two videos to watch Let's Get Sassy and Overriding Bootstrap Variables. You can go and click these links in the GitHub README. They should be up there as well, because this is all up here in GitHub, so these links actually work here. Yeah. So you can click on these two hyperlinks to find those videos. Just go to Covalence and look up SAS as well on YouTube, and you'll find the two videos. But the point is that since Bootstrap, and that's what we teach in this course, is actually built using SAS, we take the time to tell Webpack, hey, if somebody writes the following line, import a SAS file that ends in this SCSS extension, then it knows what to do, which is take all of this thing we've written here, compile it down, attach it to our app, and then boom, we have Bootstrap available for use. So you'll notice here that there's this thing called $theme-colors with a value of property of primary and a value of the Covalence blue 0091 EA hex. And then we import Bootstrap. This is actually the syntax we have to have. Think of it as I'm injecting some personal overrides into the Bootstrap while it builds. And that's how you're going to override certain Bootstrap values and properties. Go to their documentation and look up how to override Bootstrap values. Again, our YouTube video talks about how to do several of them if you want examples. And I start out with the first example here of taking primary and overriding it. So primary, by default, is that kind of deep Bootstrap blue color. And now I've overridden it to the Covalence nice lighter blue color. And you can experiment with this as well by taking over the other color values that Bootstrap uses. Things like success, danger, info, warning, secondary. You can take those and map your own custom color theme. That's that first step that you can take to super customize that Bootstrap website, how to make it look less bootstrappy and more you. A lot of the times I make some kind of vaporwave theme that I end up following through these theme colors. But anywhere you write border primary, text primary, BG primary, they will not use the default Bootstrap blue, but now your custom color, and in the case of the boilerplate, the custom Covalence blue color. So that's the first thing y'all want to do with these SAS projects is look up some kind of color palette that you like and override those colors. Primary, secondary, danger, success, warning, info. I think that's the bulk of them. But still, you can even look up color swatches online for Bootstrap, looking up Bootstrap theme colors and picking up some things you like on there. That way you can customize it a bit further. And never fear if that seems overwhelming, you can still mix in regular CSS element selectors, you can still mix in class selectors, and you can still mix in ID selectors like that. There is no problem whatsoever writing normal CSS right here as well, as it's gonna compile down to CSS anyway. So I see a lot of students mix and mash. It's fine no matter what you do. It's totally cool. There's ways to rip out this particular style choice here and move into something else, but we're not gonna get into that in this video. We're gonna assume that you wanna stick to SAS, some raw CSS, and all those lovely Bootstrap class names you're used to writing anyway. So if you want to mix in styled components, it's actually pretty easy. If you want to write inline styles in your elements, also totally fine. But since Sass is in here, you might as well try and stick to keeping styles in your Sass files here, which you can make more of and import them where needed. And that's it. Just kind of have some fun styling the project right there. So yeah, very, very cool. So I go into all the configuration files because, again, there's a lot more outside that source folder. Git Ignore, most of y'all probably know what that is. We don't push node modules to GitHub, and we're not going to push our production bundles. In some instances, you might see people push their productions to GitHub because whatever deployment strategy they have needs to read them right there. In our case, in our deployment videos, I will tell Heroku how to build my production bundles, and that's why we're not going to push into GitHub to keep it cleaner and not run into weird merge conflicts and things like that. Yeah. Package lock JSON is just a tracking of everything we've installed and how we've done it and how the trees have been built. It's just a way to make sure that your computer can recreate exactly the way my computer built my node modules and try and follow when I uninstall stuff, update stuff, delete stuff, replace stuff over time and things like that. Yeah, it's just, you're never going to mess with that. Or you're probably never going to mess with that manually. Package JSON, we've seen from my Create React App videos. You know, it's basically the instruction manual and metadata about your project. It contains the scripts on how to run it, the dependencies it needs to run, and stuff like that. So yeah, nothing to it. The Readme is the lovely markdown file that I took the time to write, and so y'all use this little lecture sheet, use it as a starting off point to understand what you're doing and have some fun with it. The tsconfig client and tsconfig server JSON files are the configuration JSON objects to tell TypeScript how I want the React website to build versus how I want the Node Express server to build. There are some things that are shared between them. There are some things that are different between them. Thankfully, these things don't make or break your code too hard, and there's plenty of options that y'all can look up and mess with to add features you're looking for. These are set up to be they're fairly forgiving, but not really. They're not super strict, but they're also not super forgiving. Like, you can't just leave things as any's, as TypeScript types all over the place, because I want you to strong type and learn how to do that. So there are some configurations that let you get away with some pretty loose typings, and there's other configurations that are super strict about it. I feel like ours falls somewhere there in the middle. But nevertheless, things for like the client config, you want to make sure that it knows it's messing with JSX and React stuff, so it doesn't have to wonder, hey, what is this weird syntax you're using? Oh, we're using React. Oh, okay, I know what that is now. Same thing for the server. It has something about knowing that it's using Node as part of its typing, so it knows that, oh, I'm building Node-based JavaScript, which has some other things associated with it. So there's configuration files that tell TypeScript how it's going to compile these things down, and I have a bit more information written there. Webpack config, this thing is a mess, and I actually included it as its own little separate point right down here in my my README, because it's kind of gnarly to look at initially, and ultimately, I have a little blurb in the README that talks about my experiences with Webpack. I once attended what was called, in my town here where I live, a React Lunch and Learn, where developers, React, other, software engineers, people that don't even know what React is but want to learn about it and get involved in the local development community, would attend these things. And I was super interested in React at the time when it was fairly new, and I was a little student like y'all selves out there. And I remember the speaker for that day was like, hey, so I tried to do a deep dive on Webpack this week so I can tell y'all how it works in combination with React and bundling, and I feel like I know less than when I started at the beginning of the week. And I feel like that's true for Webpack. You can go through their documentation, you can read tons of Stack Overflow posts, and over time, you just have to piecemeal what you know and what you don't know, and just kind of take it at the moment, not necessarily as gospel, but nevertheless, don't mess with this unless you're trying to begin adding some of those features. Like, remember in Create React App, you can import pictures, import my picture from /assets/logo.png. You're gonna, if you want to write those kinds of imports, you're gonna have to come to the client config and know what kind of rule you would have to add, and that's a jumping off point if people are interested in doing that. So I'm probably gonna not talk about too much in this video here as I talk about these individual lines of code. Basically, you have two configurations, one for server, one for client. This tells Webpack what it needs to do when approaching the source client and source server folders. So for the server config, we tell it where to find the entry point and all the things connected to it. If we provide a different environment, it will use it, otherwise it defaults to development. The other one you're going to be using in Heroku when deploying is production. You have some rules saying, hey, if I encounter a TS file, what do I do with it? Well, I'm going to make sure to use TS loader, which will compile it with TypeScript using our TS config server. Don't bundle node modules. We don't need to do that, so we make sure to ignore that. And then we provided these options for what TS rules to follow. What things it needs to resolve to, where it outputs that, dis server.js, that's where that comes from. Target node, that way it knows we're building a Express server because we can have JavaScript on the server side and JavaScript on the client side. So this target just tells it we're not writing client side code, or we're writing server side code, so it knows the differentiation. And then externals, where did I write down that? Because even I forgot what that meant at this point. I knew what it meant, and then I forgot what it meant. Go figure. But like I told you, it seems like arcane stuff here. Oh yeah, so it just makes sure that it doesn't bundle node modules dealing with the server, because these node modules are both for our server-side development and our client-side development. So we just want to make sure that this externals thing is a plugin that tells Webpack, no, don't accidentally bundle stuff that we're using in our server from our node modules folder. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And you'll notice here the client config has pretty much everything the same way, what mode we're in, where to find the entry point. This is new, this dev tool, Inline Source Map. Basically, that means it tells Webpack, hey, we have all this source client code written in TSX and TS files. They get compiled to JavaScript files, and those JavaScript files have to make sure they run down into vanilla DOM manipulation using React, so React.create element, to finally run in the browser. That's several steps or several layers that we abstract from what we actually run in the browser versus what we actually wrote in source code. The inline source map is a way to try and bring the two layers together to say, hey, if there's an error happening here in the browser in this bundled up code, it corresponds to this line inside of this file. So it's a development tool to make sure that when we have errors happening in the browser, they can kind of like follow the breadcrumbs back to where they probably originated from in our source code. So that's where you can get console logs or console errors in the browser that give you a hint of going, hey, I think this happened in homepage.tsx. The browser's not going to know what that is, but the inline source map allows the logs to show us that. Same thing for the module and rules down here, as you saw up here. We test for TS and TSX files. We test for the Sass files and what to use when we've encountered them, where Sass will compile it down to CSS. CSS needs to get imported as a module into React, and Style Loader says, oh, well, if we import the file in our index file, that means it's going to be, if we import this here, it follows all those rules we just looked at in Webpack. That's how this one little line of code knows what to do. It says compile Sass down to CSS, take the CSS and map it to object styles, and take those object styles and add them to whatever component we import them to. Whew. And then where to output it, public JS, app.js, and that's all it really boils down to. So that's how the boilerplate works. If y'all are interested in more stuff about it, please let me know. I'll be happy to do so. I think I have some webinars where I talk about ripping out Node, Sass, and Bootstrap and adding Tailwind in its own configurations. You could use, style-components is another very popular library that's actually pretty easy to integrate into this project in combination with the Sass file right there. If you want to combine Bootstrap and styled components, it's up to y'all. So hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of what we talked about here. And closing remarks. Oh yeah, I wrote this. I should remember. But it's basically saying that, this is a bare bones template for a reason. It doesn't have a lot of quality of life. It's meant to sandbox and let you focus learning on writing good React TypeScript code, good Express TypeScript API code, and from there, learn how to add all those crazy hot features yourself, because it's part of the fun of something so simple like this. I think I heard my cat Percy behind the green screen. So if my background gets a little wavy, it's because my cat likes to jump at the green screen. But yeah, you can go into Create React App, Next, and Gatsby and look at their Webpack configurations to see how they run their bundled code and what features they add and how they did them, and figure out how their process works so you can try and add some of those features to our boilerplate. But the big thing is just code, build things, get them out in the real world, and just build project after project after project after project, no matter how simple, no matter how dumb. And every single time you do, try and take it a step further. I'm going to try a different styling library. I'm going to try a different CSS kit. I'm going to try Redux. I've never tried that before. I'm going to try importing or using this game-changing library. I'm going to try using MongoDB instead of MySQL, which I learned in the course. I'm going to teach myself a NoSQL database, which is actually pretty easy to figure out. Super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Just challenge yourself, and the more projects you build, even if you don't get paid for them, you're always going to learn something new no matter what. So with this out of the way, I'll see y'all soon in the next video or in the next lab.